I was in shock because here's the big thing. This person was our DE&I manager, hired in as our DE&I manager, and I about fell over. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed in our leaders' actions in this regard. Hi, welcome back. I am Lara Morrow. Today, I want to talk about something that I keep hearing and I have heard over and over again in many different areas of my life, whether it's on social media or it's in person or from an acquaintance or a friend. Toxic work environment. I keep hearing it over and over and over again. And whether or not you just left a toxic work environment and you're recovering, or whether or not you're trying to decide if you are in one and what you need to do, this video is for you. I was even in the grocery store yesterday checking out groceries for my parents before I drove it out to their place, and a lady was just asking me questions, and I told her, that I'd left a corporate environment and was taking care of my parents, and she said, well, I'm trying to decide if I want to go back. She was the one checking out my groceries, if I didn't say that. She's like, I'm trying to decide if I want to go back to corporate, but I'm not sure. I've heard it's just really toxic. I just think that it's very interesting that everywhere I turn, that's what people are talking about. So for you guys that are in it and are drowning in it and maybe not even realize you're in it, this is for you. We're going to talk about the things, we're going to talk about the ways to know that you're in a toxic work environment, and I will have stories and examples as we go along. I stayed in a toxic work environment for way too long, and I don't know if it was because I thought that it would get better, or that I could still make a difference, or that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And often, that environment can change even at the same company because it depends on certain areas. It depends on where you are in the business, on how toxic it can be. Recognizing that toxic work environment can be really, really tough, especially if you've been in it a while, because it tends to morph and change over time. You could be in a good environment and then things can happen that changes the way that the company operates, the people that you have around you, the team dynamics, etc. And it's pretty normal not to recognize those changes. You can, new leaders can be hired, or you have a new manager that comes in, or there's an acquisition and a whole new company comes in to run it. Your team could have new people coming or going. You could also, have new leaders come in and decide that profits are more important than people, and a lot of those policies change. Or you're in a business that is scaling too fast and they're growing so fast that they are not implementing the employee practices and policies and things, even technology, that make a difference as they grow. All of these things can erode a company culture. I've been in company culture for a long time and I've seen it happen, yet when I was in it, I didn't even realize it until I started to feel some of these things. So the first one is, are you under constant stress and anxiety? Do you feel, you can even feel it physically, heart palpitations or anything like that. Do you dread going to work? Do you feel on edge all the time? When you're speaking, do you feel stress because you don't know how somebody is going to react to you, or you don't know if somebody is going to beat you down in a meeting or belittle you? Those are all things that derive from stress. A big way to tell is, do you have the Sunday dreads? Now, it's normal for everybody to be bummed that the weekend is over, right? We don't love Mondays. That's pretty normal. But do you dread it with everything that you've got, with that you can feel it? I remember just watching something with my husband on a Sunday night, and I would think, oh, something's bothering me. What is it? It's underlying, and I can't get settled. And then I'd go, oh, it's work. I don't want to go to work. And that, where it's constantly in your mind and you can't sleep, maybe you can't eat, maybe you have headaches, you can even feel it physically in your chest. I felt that at times, and I literally at times thought I'm either having a major anxiety attack or I'm having a heart attack. The next one, number 2, is poor communication or lack of transparency. That will keep everybody wondering. It will keep everybody guessing, and we don't know what's going on. It could be even the littlest of things or the biggest of things. People know something's going on. They are not stupid. So saying nothing is just very damaging to your employees, and it creates a ton of stress. There are things you cannot talk about, but you can say, hey, we're working on a new procedure for this, or we're working on a new policy for this, or we might get a new software platform, or blah, blah. I don't know much right now, but I'll let you know as soon as we know and how it's going to impact you. Do you have any questions? I know this is an uneasy time. Let me know how you're feeling right now. Let's talk about it. Just being somebody that's open and listening to somebody's unease is a great manager competency, but so many managers don't have the skill. Why? If you think about what I said before, when you are scaling too fast as a business, you're doing one of 2 things. You are hiring people quickly and not looking at who you need well, what competencies you need, what skills you need. You're not screening them well. You're not putting them through a very in-depth interview process or calling references, and you're hiring them very quickly. And you're probably not integrating them very well through an orientation or, meeting teams. Or you are promoting people from within, which usually happens. A individual performer, no management experience, are often promoted over their friends, and they don't have any training. There's no training for them. So a lot of times they're just winging it, and that impact falls on their team, and it can go, it can go deep when they don't know and understand how to communicate. Or they get very defensive. What do you mean? Y'all are just stressing out for nothing. There's just nothing going on. There's all kinds of styles out there. I'm not going to get into that now. Leadership needs to be accountable for the most communication that they can do in the most layman terms. Layman's terms? Layman's terms. I was in internal communication for a while there at the end of my corporate career, and I know the back end as well as anybody. There's so many messages that come out that say absolutely nothing. They can be paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of just nonsense. They're not saying anything. They are corporate speak that's just kind of beating around the bush, and employees know that. They know that. Leadership needs to be accountable for their communication, and instead it's things like, we continue to stay focused on our goals, blah, 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 that kind of thing, instead of getting down to what employees really want to know, how it impacts them, how it impacts their team, how it impacts their day-to-day job. And when that is not communicated, they lose trust in the business and in their leaders and in their manager. And when you start losing trust, it becomes toxic. I have always written the way that I talk. I think that it builds trust, and it helps people to really know what's going on, and it helps build relationships. I speak in layman's terms, and I really break things down for people, especially the front line, because they're not privy to all this corporate speak and corporate talk and strategy meetings and goal meetings and objective meetings. They just want to know, how does it impact me every day while I'm, driving my truck, or I'm out in a plant, or I'm checking groceries, or whatever it might be. They just want to know how it's going to impact them. They don't really want to hear about how it impacts the company, the goals, how it makes the company money, unless you are able to communicate how the company making money trickles down and impacts them. And unless it really happens and they see that. If not, they don't care. I got dinged in my last eval or whatever that is, employee eval for the year, because it literally said, Lara writes the way that she talks, blah, blah, blah. And my manager was very corporate, external marketing. I literally, if I would say it, I kind of write it out and I use smiley faces or whatever. And I've never had a problem with it in my 35 years because I think people appreciate it. It was a negative on my review. So let me give you an example on what I mean by I talk the way that I talk. So here's an example of a typical corporate message. We value our employees and are committed to providing comprehensive healthcare benefits to take care of you and your family. Each year, we review our healthcare costs and our benefits packages to make sure that they are competitive while managing and dealing with rising healthcare costs. Due to industry-wide medical and healthcare expenses, including medical and prescription costs, we have made adjustments to our benefits plan. That's a typical corporate message. Does it say anything? If you know how to manage benefits and you've managed benefits administration before, it probably makes sense to you. But when you're on the front line as an employee and you don't deal with benefits, what does that tell you? For one thing, I think that companies are doing themselves a disservice because they're not explaining what benefits they do provide, how much it costs them, what they're doing for the employees, and helping the employees to understand how to manage their benefits. What I would say to help team members understand how this works is how a company and the medical provider, the medical healthcare insurance provider, looks at last year's expenses to see how, as a big company of employees, how we utilize the medical expenses. This is what I would say to them. This year during benefits open enrollment, you're going to notice that we have a 3% increase in employee premiums across the board due to a rise in healthcare costs. There's a rise in healthcare costs across the nation. But what I want you to understand as a company, imagine that every single employee here, we're all on the same healthcare plan. So imagine that we are all on the same auto plan. We are all on the same car insurance. And we drive around for a year, and all of us as employees, every infraction or wreck or accident impacts our one insurance plan. Imagine that. Your insurance is going to go up, of course, because there's a lot of people with claims. And the more people with claims having accidents, the higher the cost goes. It's exactly the same for healthcare costs. So when you look across the board, we have thousands and thousands of employees, and we're going to the ER, to Care Now, to our primary care doctors. We're having surgeries where they're getting chronic diseases, diabetes, or critical illnesses such as cancer. All of these expenses are on one healthcare plan. The insurance companies look at utilization, which is what we used the year before together as a whole group. So the healthcare company that's providing our healthcare, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield or United or whomever, they look at what we spent the last year, how much they paid out, how much we paid in for premiums, and whether or not it was worth the business or if they needed to increase the premiums. As a company, we still pay 90% of the employee premiums. That your premium is that extra percent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people understand a little bit more what benefits look like. Then I would go in and teach them what it costs to go to an ER versus a Care Now versus just waiting until the morning if you can to go to your primary care physician. It's much cheaper to do that. So teaching them not only how to manage costs for themselves, but manage costs for the benefits plan so we don't all experience increases the next. Anyway, that's an example of how I talk the way, or I write the way I talk. I would write that out just like I would speak, so it would make sense to people. I would bullet it so it's easy to read and it's not paragraphs and paragraphs. And that's what I got dinged on. They would rather me say a lot of things that meant nothing than to say things that made sense to people. That's a way that I knew I was in a toxic work environment. So look at the communications that come out from your company, from your leaders, from your manager, in writing or on the intranet, or that are spoken in meetings. Is it saying anything? Are they being transparent? Do you feel like they're hiding things always and that you can't trust? Anyway, I'm always going to write the way that I talk, and nobody's going to stop me. When somebody's trying to make me feel like who I am as a person is wrong, that shows me that I am not in the right environment. And when you stay, it tends to beat you down as a person. The third one is negative or cutthroat culture. Gossip, cliques, favoritism, backstabbing, where all of those things are common, that's a cutthroat culture. This could be prevalent in a cutthroat sales environment, or it could be prevalent on any team in any company. It's basically people who are allowed to behave poorly and they're not held accountable for it, or the managers are a part of that, leadership's a part of that. But when you can't trust somebody that you're working with, you hold back information because you don't feel comfortable, or you don't feel comfortable speaking up about your thoughts or opinions or something that you might think is going down the wrong direction. You don't feel like you're in that trusted environment. That could be a negative cutthroat culture. Trust is the foundation of every good culture. Without trust, people spend more time worried about backlash, backstabbing, retaliation, losing opportunities because they're either not speaking up or their manager doesn't fight for them or believe in them or is focused only on themselves. So think about how many times do you sit in meetings and hear a plan, a vision, an idea, or something everybody's working on, and you have a thought or a contribution, but you do not feel comfortable speaking up. That could be a sign that you're in a toxic work environment. Pay attention going forward in meetings. If you have something to say, do you speak right up and say it? Or do you hold back because you're not sure how you're going to be treated if you speak up in the meeting? And that's really unfortunate because companies who have that kind of culture are missing out on true brainstorming, innovation, and new ideas. This means that there is no psychological safety. Employees don't feel comfortable speaking up when they made a mistake or asking for help in a situation. And all of that stifles learning and innovation, like I said, but it also keeps people from quickly problem solving and fixing situations. The fourth one is there's no work-life balance. We've heard this for quite a while, and our younger generations are starting to rebel against that, thank goodness. But not having work-life balance means that you're expected to work whenever it's necessary, whenever you are called to work, beyond your normal working hours. You're expected to respond to email 24/7. You feel guilty taking a break or taking PTO or taking vacation, or while you're on PTO or vacation, you are working. More and more companies aren't replacing people who leave the company, or they're not hiring the amount of employees needed to perform certain tasks. So working more and more and more hours are now becoming the norm because all of those tasks are moved to the current employees. If there's huge layoffs, who does that work? It goes to current employees and they have to absorb all of it. And the next thing you know, you're working so many hours, you have absolutely no personal life. You can't take care of your personal affairs. You can't go see friends. You can't see family. When you are off, you're exhausted, you're sleeping, you're brain dead. You just cannot function. Here's an example of a policy change that can quickly change the dynamic of a culture and turn something that was working okay into more of a toxic environment. We had a normal PTO policy that accrued over the years of service, like typical, and the company went to anybody who is, it was probably a senior manager and above, had unlimited PTO. And they phrased it as, oh, this is this great benefit to employees that you now have unlimited PTO. You can take PTO whenever you want, vacation, sick, whatever. At first it sounds great, but then you look at it and you think, something just doesn't seem right here, because you're feeling more and more guilty taking PTO that you've actually earned and accrued and deserve. At that time, I think I was at 8 or so weeks of PTO, of vacation a year. Never took that. Never ever took that, which is a problem in itself. But I felt terrible taking that kind of time off, mostly because I worked on very, very small teams and had to have backup. But, on average, I think I probably took 3.5 weeks a year. But moving to this, it went down from there because people feel guilty taking that time. They're wondering, there's no guidelines or definitions. There were no guidelines or definitions in the policy. So they didn't know what was too much, what was too little, and they had a hard time maneuvering it. Employees started to feel like they would look lazy or not committed if they took time off. Pretty soon, most of us were taking less PTO than we would be with a traditional PTO policy, time off policy. The company was giving the illusion that they were being flexible, but in reality, they were getting more and more work out of employees without the time off accruing on the financials the way that it would with a traditional policy. There was also no carryover time. Some companies allowed people to carry time over, or there was no paid vacation time out when somebody left, which was often part of a PTO policy. This will save companies thousands and thousands of dollars, and I'm sure it did so with our company. PTO accruals are considered a liability on a company's balance sheet. Eliminating accruals improves the financial statements of the company, making a company look more profitable to investors and stakeholders. This was a benefit to the company and not to the employees. When you have a no boundaries, or you are always on, you are always working, you are always expected to be reachable, that right there contributes to a toxic work environment. It is not sustainable at all whatsoever. And in the past, it used to be that you turned it on and you busted your butt and worked through a short-term project because it was necessary. But that was not expected. It was an exception because there was something going on where we were required to do that. And you saw a light at the end of the tunnel. If you see no light at the end of the tunnel, check that mark. The number 5 way to know if you're in a toxic work environment is there is a huge lack of growth or recognition. Does your hard work go unnoticed? Are promotions based on political dynamics, nepotism, favoritism, or is there absolutely no program or potential for growth or development at the company whatsoever? This is a problem and can contribute to a toxic work environment. Do you feel stuck or undervalued? Is there even a recognition program at all? Does your manager recognize things that you do on a regular, timely basis? And is it detailed and meaningful? Or do they just say, great job? And they absolutely know nothing about what you do and what you have done. If you have a recognition program, is it defined? Is it official? Is it fair? Are people recognized across the board diversely, or is it the same people recognized over and over and over again because those are the people visible to senior leadership? The company I left last year had no recognition program at all whatsoever for thousands and thousands of people who worked extremely hard for the company because of many different reasons. Technology gaps, growth, constant acquisitions. There were just many, many things that caused people to work in challenging environments and very difficult environments. Yet there was absolutely no recognition whatsoever. They even took away the budget for any kind of incentive or even a little gift card. Here's an example. If you see something similar to this, you might be in a toxic work environment. During a business transformation, huge technology platform upgrade, about 100 frontline employees flew into the corporate office 3 to 5 weeks at a time, staying overnight, often flying in on a Sunday, flying out late on a Friday to do end-to-end testing for the technology. They were the ones that did things on the front line, so it was very important for them to come in and understand where there were gaps, where there were problems, where things broke. And they did this for the company for a very long time, a year, maybe more, at different times. They did absolutely nothing for these people. They could have even sent an email out that said, hey, we want to thank these people for giving of themselves, being away from their families, and coming in and doing all of the things that they did for a very long time, and just listing their names. That even that can make somebody feel good. They didn't even do that. There were so many people who gave 200% of themselves during business transformation, and it wasn't good enough. Do more, do more, do more. That right there should be a big indicator to you. If you see that, you're in a toxic work environment. Now, do you have a discussion regularly with your manager about your career development goals? Or is it always just performance in your one-to-ones? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Tactical things? Or are you really working on how your career can grow and develop? If not, the company does not put employee development as a goal. Every year at my company, HR would have a succession planning process. And this usually was in the summer. During this process, employees would have to fill out an assessment about themselves. It wasn't your annual performance self-review, but an assessment on yourself as your career and how you've developed, and are you ready for the next level of position. You would also identify your career goals, your aspirations, and things that you wanted to do as a leader moving forward. Then HR and senior leaders would have a private meeting to discuss everybody who was eligible for this succession program. It was maybe senior leaders and above, but probably directors and above. So 400 or 500 people. During this discussion, the goal was to pick successors or to pick people that they wanted to invest in. How, I don't know, we really didn't see much of that, but who was going to be next in line for critical roles. You would do that, submit it, and you would never hear anything again. I mean, we talked about this. People from director on up would be wondering whatever came from this process, which impacts trust. Again, what I talked about before, lack of follow-up, lack of communication. But why? Why do employees have to go through so much and get really excited and pumped up about their opportunities in career and their aspirations to hear nothing? If you see these kinds of practices and lack of follow-up, lack of accountability, and absolutely no growth opportunities, you're going to be stuck and stagnant in this environment. Number 6 is if you see high turnover and low morale. If you see people quitting left and right, and there is an overall feeling of, drain and dread in the office, you are witnessing how high turnover impacts the current employee's morale. It's a huge red flag. If you see a revolving door of people leaving, that usually means there are deeper issues, and employees aren't talking about them as they leave. When employees leave, they tend to talk to their peers, right? I'm leaving because of this, and this. But when they go tell their manager, what do they say? Every single time, I have a better opportunity. Well, what does that mean? What does that opportunity mean? But managers take that as a reasonable response. Okay. They don't ask or dig deeper. What does that mean? What is a better, do they have great career development? Or, where did you feel stagnant in your role? Is it money? Is it this? Is it that? What could have been better? They don't ask any of that. They just take that as face value and go, okay, they got a better opportunity and they're moving on. I saw so many times very, very, very high up leaders took that as a normal response and didn't think anything of it, didn't look across the company to see if there was anything broken, or even look at that person's manager to see what was going on that team. There's all kinds of turnover data that leaders can look at to see if there is a true problem or if it's just random turnover. This means that they were completely in denial or oblivious to the culture and environment that they were working in. If you see people leaving, especially if they're talking to you about problems that you know about, and you don't see anything being done from a senior leader perspective to analyze why, how things can get better, you're in a bad working environment. Things are not going to change. The turnover is going to keep happening, and employees who still exist are going to keep absorbing all of the workload. Number 7 is leadership by fear or a controlling manager. Due to some of the reasons I've already talked about, especially managers who are promoted without any skills training, micromanagement, intimidation, or leaders who discourage feedback are very, very common. That can be a challenging team to work on. If you are feeling powerless or afraid to speak up, or if your leader yells or treats you with disrespect, get out. Get out now. Unless you feel like it's a one-off situation and you look at all the other teams and they're thriving and they're successful and there's great managers across the board. If that's the case, then you need to figure out what you need to do to move to another team or get away from the company. Number 8 is unethical or questionable practices. If you see pressure to bend rules, toleration of discrimination, the overlooking of unethical behavior, or a lack of a process to report unethical behavior. And even if there isn't a process, do you feel like you can't even go to HR, or there's nobody in the business that you can trust, and all of this is tolerated? It's a major sign of toxicity. One of the biggest things I think that impacted me and was the beginning of my decline in my morale was this story that not very many people know, but one night I was working on a web page, an intranet page, and I needed a photo of someone who was fairly new to the business as a manager. So when I don't have a headshot, the first thing I do is go look at their LinkedIn or see if I can find a headshot. So I Googled this person, and all kinds of questionable, shocking content came up just right on the first 3 or 4 hits of Google. Right before I was clicking images, because I'd Google the person and then I'd click images and I would see if there was something that was a high quality enough that I could use on the intranet as a headshot. This content was articles of this person being in several lawsuits or questionable behavior in their last position that was more of a public position. The behavior towards some citizens were questionable. And it was all there in writing. But the most shocking thing was a video of this person at an LGBTQ plus event hitting an LGBTQ person in the stomach as more of a public figure, and had investigations and all of these things. I was in shock because here's the big thing. This person was our DE&I manager, hired in as our DE&I manager, and I about fell over. I talked to my manager, who I trusted a lot. I called him actually that minute, and I knew that he'd be available because I've never really been on the flip side of needing to report and talk about something. I'm always in the HR position with people coming to me, and I prided myself on being somebody trusting, but at this point, I didn't feel like I had many people to trust. We even had an ethics line that you could call in and report something, but I didn't trust the process. I didn't trust the anonymity of, who knew it was me. And I didn't trust the manager of this person that I found all this information on. So I was in this rough position. Luckily, I trusted my manager, and I know that he went and reported it and did the right thing. He was a great guy, but nothing happened. I'm sure they talked to him because I know what HR is like on the other side. But in my opinion, if I have somebody who's in a DE&I manager role, and anybody could Google this person and see everything about them connected to our company, and that they didn't divulge that in an interview, I would be researching why we didn't find this in the interview process. There are so many things that I would be doing, and this person would be gone. That to me is a huge ethical problem, and I would not keep them. They eventually left, but it wasn't immediate, and it continued to cause a lot of problems within the close working environment of all of these people who worked with this person. So it was very, very challenging, and I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed in our leaders' actions in this regard. So that right there was my first, wow, I cannot believe this is the result, and that this is how they handled this situation. And this person is allowed to be here as our DE&I manager. What if they would have gone to a conference, like a DE&I conference? Or what if they went to an event in town that had to do with, any of our DE&I initiatives, and somebody just met them and Googled them? That would immediately be a brand hit and an impact on the business. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about that, but if you're seeing decisions like that, you are definitely in a toxic work environment, and that was the beginning of my end. The next one is a lack of accountability and consequences, and that goes with the above one that I just had, but many other things. I feel when people ask me, what do you think can make or break a culture? My first response is accountability. If there is no accountability, that is the beginning of the problem. And there's so many things that ties into accountability. It can be, performance management process is light and there's not a good structure around it. It can be managers who do not know how and avoid having difficult conversations. It can be the process is not defined for official documentation of behavioral issues. I mean, there's so many things here, but basically, if people are getting away with things that they should not be getting away with, or poor performers across the board continue to keep their jobs, then you're in a situation where there's very much a lack of accountability. And it does not get better until there is a formal process that holds people accountable to their behaviors. One of the things that can really help is if there's measurement and evaluation on a performance evaluation, a mid-year or an end-year, that is not just work-related tasks, measuring the accuracy and the successfulness of work-related tasks, but is also measuring core values and behaviors. If core values are not visible, noted within policies and procedures, people are held accountable to them, then you are in a toxic work environment. Core values should be first and foremost, and you should see people walking and talking those values, and when they're not, there should be accountability. If you see people constantly missing deadlines, constantly not following through on projects, and there's no accountability there whatsoever, or worse, you see them promoted. I saw that so many times. Or people who just check the box. I'm sure if you watched any of my other videos, you know that's a huge pet peeve of mine. Not even pet peeve, it's worse than that. I absolutely think that where you're at a check the box environment and you don't make sure that something is integrated well and continues to perform and measured, there's no point in doing it in the first place. And the very last one, if you don't feel like yourself anymore, if you've lost confidence, if you question your abilities as a person, if you feel emotionally drained, and if your personal life is suffering because of work, you are in a toxic work environment that probably ticks the boxes of many of these above, and it has finally gotten to you in more ways than one. It is time to reevaluate. Talk to somebody that you're close to and ask them if they've seen any changes in you, what they think about your work-life balance, how they think you are doing as a person in general. My husband and kids, adult kids, finally said to me, "You're a shell of yourself," which was the exact verbiage they used. "You aren't even who you used to be," because I'm really outgoing and very vivacious and giddy and, lots of joking and fun and laughing. And I wasn't that at all. And I asked my husband how long it had been, and he said, probably 2 years. I knew at that point that I had a huge problem. And that was probably 2 months before my layoff. So somebody up above was watching out for me, or the universe or something, because I don't know if I would have left. And you know why? Because it was very financially driven. I was waiting for a layoff, for a package, because I knew I had 24 years of service. And that is, looking back on it, hindsight, it was just a dumb thing to do. So what do you do when you're in a situation where you know you need to get out? You have to get out. So what do you need to do next? If you recognize all these signs, start documenting and writing down a lot of the things that you see happening. And that way it can help to confirm some of your suspicions, and you can kind of see it on paper. Pay attention in meetings. Really watch the undercurrent. Watch what people are saying. Watch people's facial expressions and their body language. Pay attention to other managers, not just your own, and see if you see any of these habits, any of these practices, anything that's going on that confirms everything that we've talked about today. You deserve a workplace that values you, that you enjoy being at, that you have coworkers who you love to interact with and work with, and where you are able to live a life outside of work. So if you want to stay, you need to explore internal solutions, start setting boundaries, and if you don't want to stay, you need to plan your exit plan. My next video is going to be, what do you do and how do you get out? I'd really love to hear some of your stories, and if I missed something, please let me know, because others in the comments can also learn from your experiences and love hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining. Reach out if you have any other questions, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.